Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode on the Pesharim. As we continue with the Pesharim, this should be our final class on the Pesharim. We'll see. We shall see. So today we're going to look at, there aren't, in general, when we talk about the Pesher scrolls that we have, many of them are very fragmentary. So there are a lot of them that we can tell are Pesher scrolls, but we can't say much more than that. Like we have little fragments of verses, etc. So we have on Yeshayahu, we have Pesher, we have two different Pesharim on Yeshayahu. We have one on Hosea. So Yeshayahu, Isaiah, right? Hosea, right? Hosea, Micah. We have a cave 1 copy and a cave 4 copy. I think they're actually different. I'm not sure if we can tell from the fragments whether, I don't think it's they're so fragmentary. I don't know if we can tell if they're the same. We can't tell if they're the same one or not. Nahum we've looked at, Habakkuk we've looked at, Zephaniah is another one, and we're going to look at Psalms. Now, so if you were listening to those names, you notice that a lot of them are from what we call the 12 minor prophets, or the book of the 12, right? The Treasar. So those prophets, for whatever reasons, seem to have really been considered a good source for these Pesher interpretations, perhaps because they were so short and focused, they could keep it kind of the same story running through in the interpretation. But again, we do have it on Yeshayahu, and we have it on Psalms, which is anything but short. We're going to take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at an example of at least what used to be called a thematic Pesher. Thematic Pesher meaning that it's taking different psukim, different verses, and saying, this is its Pesher, this is its interpretation, but it's essentially taking verses from all over to weave a story. Now, if you hear when I say, oh, they used to consider it or call it thematic Pesharim, and I think they're moving away from that, because obviously once you start, even if you're using the term Pesher interpretation, once you start taking verses from everywhere to weave a narrative, you're getting closer to what we would consider either a midrash or a homily, a dvar Torah. Like you're getting closer to something that is not a continuous interpretation of a text where you feel constrained by the text. Rather, your point is, I am going to tell a story. I'm going to say what's going to happen, or I'm going to tell a story about the group, and I'm going to use verses as my base texts. And that's something that's fundamentally different in terms of an interpretive strategy and a way of creating a text. So we're going to look at that, hopefully, after we look at the Pesher Psalms. A little bit about the Pesher Psalms. We'll see that it's thematically very similar to Nahum, which we looked at, Pesher Nahum, which we looked at last week. I'm reminding you, sometimes I'll say Nahum, I'll probably mean Pesher Nahum. I don't mean the biblical prophetic book which exists. Nahum was not a member of the sect. He was a biblical prophet. They're taking his book and they're interpreting it for themselves. Okay, so let's dive in. We are going to be flipping a little bit back and forth, but what you'll have on your screens, let me put that up and I'll share my screen. Have in your screens here. Okay, so this is actually from the Dead Sea Scrolls reader. It's blurring it. Sorry about that. Here you go. It's the exegetical text volume of the Dead Sea Scroll reader, which gives you the Hebrew text and a translation. So we're looking here at 4Q Psalms. 4Q Pesher Psalms. Let me explain what you're seeing here in terms of just the different numbers and the things that looks like code. It is kind of code. 4 again is cave 4. Q for Qumran. If this had been found at Masada, you would have an M here instead. So 4 is the cave. Q is for Qumran. 171 is simply the number of the scroll. It's fairly arbitrary. And then what we have here is 4Q, the P is for Pesher, and Psalms, and then the A means that there's a B. There's another one, right? So the other one is generally when they it's very, very fragmentary. So we're not really going to be looking at it. It's edited by John Allegro of Dead Sea Scrolls and Sacred Mushroom fame. If you know anything about John Allegro, he had a pretty wild theory that essentially ended his academic career. But before that, he was a very well-known scholar in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He edited. Now, the thing with this section is it's going with DJD5. So a lot of these scrolls are being re-examined and new words are found in it. So for example, so if I'm looking, I was thinking of, I actually should have had this open. Let me stop my sharing. I'm going to find it for you so you can see it. Hold on, because I just had this open. Hold on just a moment. Here we are. So here, what you see on your screen is from the Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library. And they have, for all of the Psalms that belong to the Israel Antiquities Authority, to remind you, there are two entities in Israel that own the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the Israel Antiquities Authority and the Israel Museum, and they don't get along. So they digitize it in completely different projects. If you're looking for a scroll that must be there, but it's not there, it probably belongs to the other guys, right? And you'll have to go and look for it elsewhere. But this is a really nice project because they do all sorts of different, you see a full spectrum color image, an infrared image, and you can go in and click in and see it. And really, you can see letters that you couldn't see before because of the types of photographs they're taking of these. And you can kind of zoom in. And if you wait, it'll resolve itself too. It's really crazy what you can do now. So we're looking at kind of what they were able to read when this first came out in DJD. And what's nice also is if we go back, it'll tell you some kind of basic stuff about it, what the manuscript type is. It's a composition type Pesher, and it's from the Herodian period. When it says, when you see on this site, the Herodian period, it means the scroll itself is dated to the Herodian period. Sometimes we'll say, oh, the text seems to be earlier than that, but it was copied in the Herodian period. But in this case, there's not a lot to tell us when it was written, when it was composed. Okay, so that's kind of a nice to see the fragments you see here. You actually have some kind of big chunky fragments that you can really kind of dive into. So here we can actually read the text as opposed to many of the other Pesher fragments. So let's go back to our text here. So here we're looking, let's actually start. No, let's start from here. What you see here is, if you notice, this is reconstructed. Let's find a place where it's not reconstructed. Here we are. Okay, what you see here in column 2, line 4, you see all of a sudden we have Paleo-Hebrew for the Tetragrammaton. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey is written in Paleo-Hebrew. This is true for this scroll. Whenever it quotes a verse and it has the Tetragrammaton in it, it is written in Paleo-Hebrew. This is not unusual for Qumran. And in certain cases, they'll even write El, Aleph, Lamed that way. They're very careful with God's name. The question is, what is the purpose here? Is it because Paleo-Hebrew is considered the original Hebrew script, therefore the holy name of God should be written in that script? Or this is Larry Schiffman's idea. I honestly, I don't really agree with it because it seems a little far for me. If in rabbinic tradition, writing something in Paleo-Hebrew means you can throw it away. Like if you have a Torah scroll written in Paleo-Hebrew, you can dispose of it. You can just throw it out. It's not considered what we call today shemot, where you would have to specially, put it in Gniza and take care of it and not just throw it out because it has the name of God. If it's written in Paleo-Hebrew, it kind of doesn't count. So Larry Schiffman has said, well, maybe they don't want to write it in the Hebrew that counts because you shouldn't. So in order to avoid that, they're writing it in Paleo-Hebrew. If we had, maybe that could be, it would be, unfortunately, we don't have any legal statement of theirs that says anything like that. What we would, if we didn't have that rabbinic law, we would just assume that the reason is because Paleo-Hebrew is the original Old Hebrew. Let's write the name of God in the original Old Hebrew that it should be written in. Which is, but of course, it's interesting, and it does bring up a lot of questions in terms of how they thought about the name of God, how they thought about what the act of writing, the fact that they're not using Paleo-Hebrew for anything else, like except for the name of God. If you think it's so holy, why aren't you writing everything in that? So, so it would make it, I think, even for them, difficult to read.
Miriam?
Yes.
Aren't those two ideas completely in
Yes, those two ideas
each other?
completely oppose each other. You got to accept one or the other. You can't have both of them. Well, you know how sometimes they say, well, both can be true. In this case, no. You got to choose, right? To me, I feel like it would be lovely if they had that halacha, if they had that legal ruling. That would be super cool. I find it hard to believe that they would be the precursors to that rabbinic law.
But that rabbinic law exists. Like that's
that rabbinic law, right? In other words, you can. That's the idea, and that's what Larry Shiffman says. Now, it does make sense. It's not like his idea is completely bizarre, because the fact is they're very careful about quoting the name of God. In general, they're careful about quoting the name of God to the extent, again, that they will change. They will actually sometimes downgrade the tetragrammaton in the original verse to Aleph Lamed or to Elohim. They'll avoid using Yud Hey Vav Hey. They'll avoid using that name, and they'll use a lesser name of God instead when they're quoting something. Now, again, depends on the scroll, right? But they're very careful about quoting the name of God. So you say, well, if they're so careful about it, what does Paleo-Hebrew have to do with that? Well, if you go by the rabbinic ruling that writing something Paleo-Hebrew kind of doesn't count, it doesn't make it too holy, then that is a way of avoiding writing the name of God in a way that would create problems. You would have to assume that, in fact, that is a legal ruling that they had as an understanding.
But even in the Paleo-Hebrew, they avoid the name of God?
Sometimes, yes. In other words, here, no. Right here, you see that they're quoting and they're using the tetragrammaton. I shouldn't make a note of it because I'm always remembering it. I have to find it. There's a place where they write Aleph Lamed in Paleo-Hebrew, El in Paleo-Hebrew, and there are places where they simply downgrade it so they don't use Paleo-Hebrew. They're quoting a verse that uses the tetragrammaton, and they use a different name of God so that they don't write the tetragrammaton. Right.
By the way, just an aside, you mentioned the Antiquities Authority and the Israel Museum not getting along. There is one very, very annoying thing that they both have in common, and that is that they both have websites, and in those websites they have catalogs of archaeological artifacts in Hebrew and in parallel in English. But if you're looking at something, for instance, on the Hebrew site, and you want to know the English translation, you click English, and you don't get the English translation, you get the English homepage. So there is no.
Oh, that's annoying. Yeah.
So and it is because there is a secret lexicon of archaeological artifacts, proper terms for objects in English and in Hebrew, and there is a direct translation between, but there is no English-Hebrew dictionary that connects the two of them. And for translators that like me, that is exceptionally annoying.
Yeah, no, that's pretty bad. That's really, really annoying.
And it's both on the Israel Museum website and the IAI website. They have the same.
I will believe you. It sounds completely believable. So let's go back to our text. So here, so they absolutely avoid in certain scrolls, they absolutely avoid writing the name of God. So Larry Shiffman's hypothesis does make sense. It just does assume that they have the same ruling that we see later in rabbinic tradition, and I just don't see an indication of that. But hey, you could say, like, there's a lot of things that they don't feel the need, and we've talked about that, but they may not feel the need to write down. Like, if everyone knows, hey, this is what you do when you're writing down, like, again, there are places where they write down the tetragrammaton without Paleo-Hebrew. It's not, and there's nothing that goes across the board, right? But but it could go either way. And those two opinions are directly opposed. It's one or the other. They either think it makes it holier, or they think it makes it okay to write it, or more okay. Okay. All right. So let's dive in. And here we have they have not, as I guess an editorial decision, they haven't restored the verse. They've only restored it in the translation. But let's go and see the actual verse here. Okay. And this is going to be a continuous interpretation of this part of Psalms, of Tehillim Lamed Zayin, Psalm 37. So here, this is what it is interpreting. Dom ladonai v'cholel lo al titchar b'matzlich darko b'ish oseh mezimot. Right? So be patient or be still, wait for God, and don't be upset when someone's successful, a person who's plotting, right? So there's a bad guy, and this is in the context of you will be shown to be correct, and the other guy is going to be wrong. Because there's a lot of, as anyone who's ever read Psalms beginning to end, like in a sitting, notes, there are a lot of situations in Psalms where it's about false witnesses. They're testifying against me. They're testifying against me. They're lying about me. They're lying about me. Here I am, and I'm innocent, and I am just being hunted by the arrows of fate. And I'm sure I'm completely messing up whatever that was originally a quote of. But I'm just, and so this is a similar situation. And if we look back at our text, what is this, of course, going to become? Here we are. What is this, of course, going to become? Let's go in to here. We're on line 18 here. Tishro al isha kazav asher hit'a rabim b'imrei sheker ki bacharu b'kalut v'lo sham'u l'melitz da'at. Its interpretation concerns the man of lies, ish hakazav, the man of falsehood, who led many astray with words of falsehood, for they chose worthless things or lighter things or easier things, right? And did not listen to the melitz da'at, the person who was the mediator, not the person who was trying to transmit knowledge, right? So again, similarly to what we heard in Pesher Nachum, this is a situation where they're like, why aren't people listening? Why are they misled by this person who is outside of the community and convincing them that he's right? Almost certainly having to do with their rules and possibly the calendar. Okay. And then another theme that we have from Nahum, Lima'an yovedu b'cherev uberav b'dever b'dever heref b'dev. Sorry, that's the next is the verse. So they'll perish by the sword and by hunger and by the plague. Again, this is something we saw in Nahum, right? They're going to all die because they went the wrong way. All right. Next two verses, or next verse and a half. Actually, I want to see here. Yeah. So here we don't have. And also one of the things that is a little bit difficult in this class, sometimes we don't always see where there's a slight change in the verse. So sometimes it's not always that the verses that they quote are necessarily one-to-one, the Masoretic version. So here we have Heref me'af vazov chema al titchar ach lahareya. So give up anger, abandon fury. This is a pretty good translation. Don't be angry, right? Don't be angry. I wouldn't say it can only do harm. I would translate this as don't be angry in order to do harm, right? Don't be angry or even do harm is how I would translate it. But even doing harm. Don't do that, okay? In other words, what's the idea of the verse? The idea of the verse is don't take action into your own, don't take the law into your own hands. Don't take action yourself. Everything in the end, what is it? The wheels of the gods grind slow, but they grind exceedingly smooth, right? Eventually, it's going to come around to this guy. God's going to wipe him out. Okay, just wait. You just have to wait. Don't do it yourself. Just leave it be. Don't do this person any harm. So let's see how that transmits. Okay, so it doesn't stop that, right? It doesn't stop for Achla Hareya. Why? Because that's a really unsatisfying way to stop. It doesn't make sense to stop where don't do bad things to them. They want the payoff, so they're going to go into the payoff. Ki mire imi karetun, for evil men will be cut off. So it reads right into the next verse. Now, also, of course, the verses run into each other. So you can say, well, they may be actually reading it as a continuation of the verse, or they may simply want to interpret it as a unit so that they can get to the good stuff, right? To the people being cut off. Here we are. We're the same as the verse, right? Its interpretation. I'll do this in English just because we don't have a lot of time. Its interpretation concerns all who turn back to the law. Oh, this is maybe not such a great translation. Here, I'll call Shavim. No, it's all right. I'll call Shavim la Torah. Anyone who return to the law or to the Torah. Asher lo yima'anu lashuv mira'atam ki kol hamamrim lashuv me'avonam yikaretu. It's on everyone who returns to the law. Okay, don't get angry at people. Give them a chance to come back. All right. It's actually a nice way to interpret it, right? It's talking about, okay, there are wicked people. Don't get angry. Why should you get angry? Because some of them are going to come back. There's some of them going to come back, but the ones who don't, those who refuse to return from their sin, they will be cut off. Okay? Is that clear to everyone? Okay. Vikaveh, and here note the different spelling here. You've got an aleph here, whereas in the original verse here, Vikaveh Hashem Hema Yeshuar. It's those who look or hope to God, they will inherit the earth. And here what we have an extra aleph, right? Vikaveh. How do they pronounce it? It doesn't seem like they pronounced it Koveh, because that aleph doesn't really belong there. Okay. So those who look to God, Hema Yeshu Eretz, right? They will inherit the earth. Pesherot interpretation. Hema Edat Bechirah They are the ones who are doing his will. Those are the people from the community, right? Edat Bechirah, the community is his chosen community. The community of his chosen. They are the ones who are doing his will. They are the ones who are waiting for God. Okay, it's very, very clear. The psalm is talking about us. Talking about us, talking about our enemies, talking about the people who are not returning when they should return. Okay. And this I'm just gonna go ahead because it's pretty clear. And a little right? In a little while, the wicked, there's no more wicked, right? And I'll look in his place and he's gone, right? Just to check in terms of the text. Here, and you will look at his place and he is gone. And obviously, we already know who that's going to be. Yes.
It's sort of interesting because the Ve'enenu is sort of reminiscent of the language of in reference to Chanukh, about Chanukh, who was a tzaddik. It also said Ve'enenu. It's the same word, but here it's talking about Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, it's a nice verse. The verse is a very evocative verse. You look for him and he's gone, like he's already taken care of. It's an evocative verse, and there is a change here. Ve'et bonana, and I will look. Right, is a change from the verse that we have in the Masoretic text, which is "and you'll look." Right? Is there a reason for it? Is it because they want God will look and he's gone? It's not particularly clear. All right. Pishro al kol harish'al l'sof arba'im hashana asher yitamu v'lo yimtza ba'aretz kol ish rasha v'anavim yeshua. So this is very, oh, and then he goes into the next verse. It says that its interpretation concerns all the wickedness at the end, the completion of 40 years when they will be consumed and there will not be found on earth any wicked man. And so notice that it says in the verse, it says Rasha, a wicked person, and this is extending it kind of naturally to wickedness, Resha, right? Evil, right? There will be no more evil. I'll call Harisha, right? There will no more evil to the end of 40 years. 40 years, it's nice because it's using the typological 40 years, right? I don't think it's talking about literal 40 years. It's talking about 40 years as a period, as a long time. At the end of the 40 years, at the end of this period of struggle, we will have our hoped for victory against evil and the wicked. Okay, v'anavim yeshu aretz v'tangul al rov shalom. So the humble will inherit the earth, and they will have joy from all the great the great bounty and well-being. Pishro, its interpretation, and here I have to switch. Here we are. Pishro al edat evyonim. Okay, and here we see they're reading anavim. Humble is aniyim, the poor. Now the truth is that biblically there's a source for that. In other words, you could absolutely read that, in a scholarly biblical sense. You can actually read anavim as talking about the poor. It's not a wild interpretation, but they're reading anavim, the humble, as the poor. Let me get to the English. Here we are. This is the English and this is the Hebrew. Edat ha'evyonim asher yikablu et moed hata'ut v'nitzlu mikol pachei blial v'achar yitangu kol something ha'aretz v'hitdashnu b'chol tanug basar. Okay, what's going on here? This is going to be the congregation of the poor ones who will accept the time of error. In other words, it sounds like they're going to accept. Normally, I would read Moed Tov differently, but they're going to accept this period when things are going wrong and people are making mistakes, terrible mistakes. They're going the wrong law, and they will be saved from all the traps of Belial. When we get to the Damascus document, we're going to see more about the traps of Belial, the traps of Belial set for innocent people to make them think that the wrong law is the right law, but they have been saved because they chose the right law. They've been saved from the traps of Belial. Since they've been saved from the traps of Belial, and they accepted the hardship of this period of suffering, right? When people are all around them are making mistakes, they will have the joy of this kind of end time, right? And at that time, they will have luxurious. It says in all the delights of the flesh. Delights of the flesh in modern English means something different, I think, than what they're saying here, right? And all the delights that are connected to being a human being, all right? They will have physical delights, right? They will, and why is that important? What we're reading, we can read between, we don't have to read deep between the lines here. They feel persecuted, they feel physically persecuted, they feel poor, right? They are physically not doing well, right? Not doing well. They're under they're under pressure. They feel under attack. And it sounds like they feel like we're poor and much poorer than everyone else. Now, what's interesting is, and again, Qumran, if we're talking about what they're describing as a community that was probably existed around 100 years. If they've been existing about 100 years, they have ups and downs, okay? There's at least one period where they seem to have been doing pretty well for themselves, because according to the rations that they describe in their rules, the rations are pretty nice ones, and they seem to have been doing pretty well, at least at a certain point. But it's not crazy to think that there was a certain point where they weren't, especially if they were being persecuted, especially if they felt persecuted by whoever was in control in Jerusalem. And Qumran is not that far from Jerusalem, okay? Okay, and then we're going to go right into, again, what we saw in Pesher Nachum, which was this idea of different groups that are opposing them, okay? Zomem Rashal Tzadik v'chorek alav shinav Hashem yisachek lo. Kira'a ki bayomo. Right? The wicked plots against the righteous person, and he gnashes his teeth at him, and here's something this is restored. But God is going to laugh at him because he sees that his day is coming. It's here. This is the translation here. Pishro, its interpretation. Al aritzei habrit asher bevet Yehuda asher yizomu lechalot et osei Torah asher be'etzat hayachad. Okay, so its interpretation is about the ruthless ones of the brit, the covenant that are in the house of Yehuda, who plot to finish those who do the law. Asher be'etzat hayachad, they're the council of the community. This sounds like it could be, because elsewhere we saw that when they talked about Yehuda, they seem to be talking, at least in a certain sense, about themselves. Perhaps they're talking about something inside the community, people who broke off from the community or were fighting against the leadership of the community. Okay, and that's a particularly bad thing because they really can destroy the community, and that's what they were trying to do from their point of view, right? Ve'el lo yazvem biadam biadam, and God won't leave them in their power. Okay. Cheref patchu reshaim v'yadrochu kashtam lapil ani ve'avion v'lidbach yishrei derech charbam tavo b'libam v'kashtotem tishabarna. I have to keep on finding it now. I read it and then I'm like, okay, where did I start? Hold on. Okay. So God won't allow these guys to prevail. These guys who seem to be fighting from within, or they left the community and now they're fighting the leadership, they will not prevail. Okay. So enemies open their sword and they pull back their bow to fell a poor to fell the poor. And needy is not a bad word. The poor and needy, and to slaughter those who are honest, right? Who have straight paths. Those who are honest, unlike them, right? Their own sword will come in their hearts by the wicked, and their bows will be broken. That's the verse. Okay. Tishro al rish'ei Ephraim u'Menashe. Asher yivakshu l'shloch yad b'kohen u'b'anshe atzato. Its interpretation is about the wicked. Now we're talking about different groups of Ephraim and Menashe. Now again, if this is the same as the way we were looking at Pesher Nachum, Ephraim and Menashe are the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Prushim and the Tzdokim. Both those groups are opposing this community. Both of them. Okay, and they're going that will try to hurt the Kohen, the priest, the Anshe Atato, and his kind of entourage, the people, his council. Okay, so this is again, we're seeing again, the themes are very similar to Pesher Nachum. This is an embattled community. They see enemies everywhere they look, and where they don't see enemies, they see people who should be convinced by them and aren't. Okay, they're the people who aren't repenting and who should be joining them but aren't. They're the people who there's still some hope. They might still realize and then come back. And then there are the enemies. They're enemies from within. They're enemies from without. Every group you want to mention, bad stuff, right? It makes sense that the Pharisees and Sadducees are attacking not them as much as their leader, because their leader is the one who is leading them, and who, from the point of view of, let's say, the priests in Jerusalem, he's the one who's leading them astray. You got a group, they're following a charismatic leader, and the charismatic leader says, it's not Yom Kippur today, it's Yom Kippur next week. And they're like, okay. And so the priests in Jerusalem, or who could be both Pharisees and Sadducees, because we know that they were priests at the same time, right, in the Jerusalem temple. We have all sorts of rabbinic texts talking about that, about how the Pharisees were trying to make the Sadducees keep their law, right? The Prushim and Tzdokim, and the Prushim were doing all sorts of things to make sure that Tzdokim kept their law, because the Tzdokim were priests in the temple alongside them. right? So they're both going against their Kohen, their priest, and trying to stop. They both see this community as some kind of a threat or at least wrong. All right. Be'et hamitzaref haba alehem, right? When is this going to happen to them? Because right now they're doing fine. Right now, Prushim, Stokim, they're doing fine. Ephraim and Manasseh doing great, right? When are they going to fall by their own sword and have their bows broken? It's going to happen in the time where be'et hamitzaref, in the time when they're going, when the people of Israel are going to be purified. Haba alehem, that's coming.
Miriam?
Yes.
I just want to be clear here. Are you saying that the Prushim and the Tzukim are viewing the leader of the Qumran community as a threat, or the other way around? That the Qumran community is viewing the Tzukim and the Prushim as a threat?
Well, sorry, I didn't hear you. Can you say that again?
Are you saying that the Prushim and the Tzukim are viewing the leader of the Qumran community as a threat, or the other way around?
Okay, well, clearly the other way around, right? Clearly Qumran sees them as a threat. Clearly, whoever's writing this document sees these guys as a threat because they are a threat. They apparently, at least the way that it's told here, they tried to do something to the leader or priest of the community, right? Yeah. That's what they're saying. They're saying they tried the shloch yad. That means to do something physically to him. That's what it means.
To the leader of the Qumran community.
Either to grab him or to attack him, the leader of the community. One assumes the priest that they're talking about here is the leader of the community, right? They're trying, so that's clear. Why would they try to do that? Now, there are two ways of looking at it, or actually there are lots of ways of looking at it. You could say, well, they're like, hey, this is Judea. We're in control. We don't like what you're doing. Stop it, right? Whereas, and you're doing the wrong law. Let's say, let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Everyone wants to do God's law. And the Pharisees Prushim look at the Qumranites and they're like, guys, what are you doing? This is wrong. You got the wrong calendar. This is not right. You've got to stop. And they say to the leader, stop it. They say, you're the leader. We're not going to hold these other guys. You're the leader. Stop it, or we're going to do something, right? You could say, all right, that's a situation that I could see happening, especially you've got priests in the temple. This is happening not far away, right? And I'm saying priests in the temple because I'm influenced here by Pesher Psalms, right? Because Pesher Psalms describes that it's something where sounds like someone's going from Jerusalem to them, wherever they are, Qumran or wherever else they're staying, and trying to stop them from celebrating a different Yom Kippur, right? That's what it sounds like they're describing.
Some kind of thought police?
More the thought police, practice police. Look, you guys know how it works. We're Jews. It's not so much a thought police. It's not the thought that gets you in trouble, right? It's guys, no, this is not Yom Kippur. We see what you're doing, right? I don't think I think it's much less thought police than action police, right? But that's what Pesher Psalms seems to be describing. However, it sounds like it wasn't successful. In other words, there's a limit to how much policing is happening here, because it sounds like it was all they tried, and they didn't succeed. And the people that they're describing are supposedly the people who are in charge, the people who are in power, and yet they're not succeeding. So it's not clear how far these guys really wanted to go to stop this, right? Like, were they really going to actually physically harm him? Or did they threaten harm and then he didn't listen? And then they're like, okay, you know what? This is not right. We'll just, okay. Right. Because it's not clear why weren't they successful? They weren't. Now, of course, if you have a whole bunch of people who believe something very, very strongly, it's not so easy to come in and stop it. Right. It's not. So, and we see there's no.
Miriam?
Yes.
Miriam?
Yes,
I'm trying to get a sense like of every.
So I'm letting you talk.
I'm trying to get a sense of kind of like how well known was the Qumran community? Were they out proselytizing? Are they walking up and down in the city of Jerusalem and saying you're are wrong, or what are they
So-
doing?
Yeah, so that is a great question.
Thank you.
And again, if you look at their texts, and again, in the Damascus document, they seem to be talking as if there's an argument that people should be hearing from them, right? And the reason people aren't being convinced about what's right, but also when they talk about the traps of Belial, they're those specific things. In other words, they have certain rules that are their teacher has gotten, or for example, Pesher interpretation, their teacher has gotten, But they also, but when they talk about the traps of Belial, they are actually talking about interpretation of scripture that they may have thought was obvious. They may have said, why isn't everyone interpreting it the way we're interpreting it? This should be obvious to people without proselytization. Like, can't you see? I know there aren't that many examples, and this is the easiest one for me to talk about, the 2x2 example. Can't they see it was Adam and Eve? Can't they see it was Noah's Ark 2x2? Can't they just realize that you need to have one wife, that's it? Like, shouldn't that be obvious? And right, and they do in certain places, they do kind of use the excuse for the vote for the forefathers that it was before the Torah was given, right? So that's their out for those people, and then they had to kind of explain David. That's a little bit harder, right? They may have simply expected everyone to just realize that this is the right, that at least in terms of the traps of Belial, they should just realize that their interpretation is correct. However, and again, in the letter of Miksat Maseh Torah, where it's framed as if they're writing to the king, right? But that's not the same as proselytizing regular people, right? Writing to the king is more like, we're going to where the power is, he'll accept it, and then he can just kind of set it for everyone else. And that's the way it's framed. It's not framed, and it's framed all very much with stuff having to do with the temple, that letter, that, this is the way practice in the temple should be, and purity laws. But it's not clear what kind of proselytizing they would have done. It would have been much more realize the people who are in these communities are people who are reading. They have the time to read, they have the resources to read, and they're thinking about these things. Now, there were a lot of Jews like this, but this wasn't going to be your average Jew who's just trying to get by, do what he should be doing. He's going to keep some kind of kosher, he's going to keep some kind of purity law, he's going to keep keep the holidays, keep Shabbat, and he's going to try and live his life, right? And then there are the guys who are like, you know what, I'm going to read this scroll. But I really need to know. But I need to be more holy. Is that enough, though? But is that enough, right? So you have these people who are much more involved than everyone else, and that's when you get all these different groups, right? Then you have these different groups who are spending time arguing, right, with each other as well, right? And so the question is, like, again, it gets very hard because if they're the Essenes, so Josephus knows of the Essenes, right? And he knows something about their beliefs, unless he's making it up, right? And he talks about going to a certain Essene for prophecy and stuff like that. They still do prophecy. And he'll say things about their beliefs. Well, clearly he's learning about it, right? So there's a way to learn about it. But I think it's a much more where you've got people who, like, and just the fact that Josephus describes himself as like, oh, I wanted to try it out, so I went and I became a member. Like, he's describing the stages of being a member. This is what people probably would do. They'd say, hey, you know what? If they had the wherewithal to do something like that, you could see someone saying, you know what? Why don't I see? Maybe these guys are right. And it could be that, and this again, I don't think that they were the Essenes, one-to-one the Essenes, but they certainly have things in common with the Essenes, and people joined the Essenes. Like, this was a group that people knew about. And I think it was more like people were experimenting and arguing. And if you look in the Gospels, like where Jesus is arguing, is going to a synagogue, and he's giving a kind of Dvar Torah, right? He's saying what do you call it? A homily? He's giving a little speech, and he gets into arguments with the different people there. over halacha, over the law. This and where and thought, and Sadducees are like, well, if you like Sadducees are arguing with him about, well, if you believe in a world to come, then what do you do about having multiple spouses in the world to come? Right? Ha ha ha. Clearly there's no world to come. That wouldn't work. A woman has one husband and then she's widowed and she marries another. Then who is she with when in this world to come you're talking about? Ha 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 ha. Right? And that's because Sadducees don't believe in a world to come, right? So you have these people arguing, and that's a description. You can say, well, is it a real description? Is it not a real description? It's the sort of thing that just the fact that you have these groups going around. You have the Baptists, right? You have these Baptists that are wandering around. Then you have the Jesus movement that's wandering around. We have the Qumran community writing scrolls. It's a time of these groups saying, what should I be doing? What does God want from me? How should we be behaving? How should we be acting? What should we be doing? And it's just this, and there is a lot of creativity in that. I mean, there is a lot of creative thought going on, and a lot of it, they were doing the series on biblical interpretation. A lot of it is involved with interpreting scripture, interpreting biblical texts over and over again, or, in new ways, or in combining, different things, like looking at it and saying, okay, what does this mean? Retelling it. And there's a lot of that creative work that's going on in these communities.
But you wonder if any of these tiny groups had the manpower or the resources or the wherewithal to do Chabad-style kiruv.
I think they want to do Chabad-style kiruv. I think
You think they did?
Look, I mean, again, I don't know who else, like, I don't know who else here. Again, I've said this before. I went to a Chabad school. I went on Miftzah. Miftzah is when you would go out and give out Shabbos candles, that whole thing. That's what you would do. I was in Sivos Hashem. I did the whole thing, right? And it was nice. It was cute. We didn't do anything disgusting, and we weren't pushy, But Chabad accepts a lot of things that the Qumran community never would. To proselytize the way Chabad does would not be something that the Qumran community could stand, because the way what Chabad does is it's very, very, until you're like Chabad, it's very flexible and very understanding. And anyone can walk in and just go ahead and do whatever, someone can walk in and no kippah and they're covered in tattoos and they can't read Hebrew, but they'll get an aliyah, right? And we're so used to this as an idea of, oh, sure, of course. It's not, oh, sure, of course, right? This is what Chabad does. This is what today's kiruv people do. Qumran would never do that. Qumran community would never do that. They would be like, this guy, I don't know where he's from. Why would I think he's pure? Why would I think he's like, really? Like, no, they would not accept someone like that. And so to the extent they would proselytize, it could only be to kind of, it wouldn't be proselytizing the way we think of it, certainly not in terms of Chabad. It would be much more like kind of putting their ideas out there in the marketplace of ideas. And getting people, I don't know if any of you have seen the short film that Hanan Eshel was involved in. It was very cute. I think it's called Mikdash Adam, a person temple of man, and it's the movie itself reads a lot into one very small reference to Mikdash Adam. You create a temple of man, but it's a way of imagining what could have happened, where you have someone who grew up in the community and leaves, and he goes to Jerusalem and he meets a young priest who is not, a young Kohen who is not happy. He's not happy with the way things are going on in Jerusalem. He doesn't feel like it's the real thing. And the two of them talk, and the guy who leaves tells the Kohen, the young priest, enough that intrigues him to go and find the community and join, right? It's like, oh, really? They do that? Oh, that sounds really good. It sounds really interesting. Like, and then he goes and joins. And it's it's actually I'm gonna see if I can find it. Maybe it would be nice if it's on YouTube. I know they showed it. They used to show it at the Israel Museum sometimes at the entrance to the Qumran exhibit. I'll see if there's any way to watch it not at the Israel Museum, because it's a cute imagining of how this community could have grown. But I think it was a time of seekers. I think it was, it was a time where there were certain people who really were kind of looking out there, what's the right thing? And that's how they were able to continue for as long as they did.
But could you imagine one of a member of this community going to the town square and standing up on a pedestal and preaching like a Navi, like this is what you should be doing? Or
I can, yes. I mean, you've been in Hyde Park, right? I could imagine it, sure. I can imagine it in Jerusalem, sure. Why not? I mean, as long as it wasn't, again, it's hard for me to, and not in Jerusalem especially. This is the thing. In the Galilee, in the Galil, it was much easier to do stuff like that. Because it wasn't, again, like I've said before, it wasn't a Roman protectorate. But when the Qumran community started, it wasn't a Roman protectorate yet either. So when the Qumran community started, it was probably a lot easier to go into Jerusalem and start, lecturing about things. It was probably a lot less. Now this is just me talking, right? Like, but I feel like it was probably when they began, it was probably a lot less. It was probably a lot easier to go around in Jerusalem and say these things than it was later when things came under direct Roman control, and that meant that it had to be much more structured. And again, I'm kind of basing myself on what we know in terms of what groups were going around the Galilee before the destruction.
Just one comment on the or question about what we were talking about at the very, very beginning about Paleo-Hebrew and it having somewhat less a lesser degree of holiness than the Hebrew that was being used at that time. It sounds very strange, but because wouldn't there be an assumption that the original manuscripts of the Holy Scriptures, including the Aseret Dibrot that have been lost to us, would have originally been written in Paleo-Hebrew?
Well, that's why I think that it's a way of writing it in a holier script as opposed to writing it in a script that can be thrown away. That's why I don't really accept Larry Schiffman on that. That's the reason. I just find it kind of hard to believe that they wouldn't have instinctively thought this is a holier way of writing, as opposed to the less holy way.
Chazal thought that too.
What? Sorry.
Why wouldn't Chazal have also thought that?
Chazal likes doing things that are absolutely the opposite of what you would normally think, right? Like, why is a book that makes it into Tanakh causes impurity of the hands? That's how you know. It says Megillat Esther causes impurity of the hands, and that means that it's part of Tanakh.
No, but that makes sense. That makes sense.
They want to know this is like code. It's code. If I say, oh, that book causes impurity of the hands, you know it's in Tanakh. What? Isn't that crazy? But it's fun.
No, but first of all, they said why. They said because they did it so that people don't.
They're trying to figure out why. If you look at that text, they're trying to come up with reasons why. Because after the fact, because it's such a weird thing, they're like, well, because they didn't want them to put them in the grain silos, they'd be eaten by mice. Why would I put a scroll in a grain silo? But then they have another explanation also, right? I forgot the other one. There's another explanation that they come up with, but they're trying to explain it after the fact. They're like, why would it cause impurity of the hand? Oh, it must have been a decree because of such and such. They themselves, like at the point where you're reading about it, it's already like, that's what we say. It caused impurity of the hand. Not just what we say, but that's the rule. It caused impurity of the hand. And then they have to figure out why. Right? So there are like two explanations. I don't remember the non-grain silo one. I remember the grain silo one.
The main reason is that so that people don't use them disrespectfully. Like when they have to only use them in a special way, then they would be more careful.
Right. But if you read the Gemara, they're trying to figure out why it is. In other words, it doesn't sound like they say, oh, this is the reason. They say it caused impurity of the hands, and then they're like, why? They're like, well, because people were going to store it in the grain silo, and mice would eat it. So in order for them not to store in the grain silo, they have it cause impurity, right? And again, there was a second one which I don't remember anymore. But it was much more of an after the fact. We have to explain why it caused impurity. Oh, just a quick note to something that Moshe says. Allegro translates Evyonim as the poor ones capitalized. I don't think he's trying to say this is a reference to the Ebionites. I think he's saying it's a reference to the community, and that's why he capitalizes it as the poor ones. He wants to say that they are referring to themselves, the community with a capital C. So it's the poor ones, not just poor ones, but the poor ones, us, the community. I think that's what he's trying to say. Okay, so let me just so we can kind of conclude Pesher Psalms. There's not much left. In fact, let me see if let's just finish it quickly. So when we say they will not be put to shame in evil times. Let me show you. Here we are. Lo yevoshu be'et ra'ah. They shall not be ashamed. Oops. They shall not be ashamed in a time of evil. Ubeimei ra'avon yisbau. In a time of hunger, they will eat their fill. And we go back to our text here. So who is that? Its interpretation concerns the penitence of the desert. Let me open both up here. Okay. Its interpretation considers the penitence of the desert. Okay, we're in column 3. Here we are. Shavei Hamidbar. Those, it could be penitent to those who return to the desert. Asher Yefiu Elef Dor, Bishara V'lahem Kol Nachalat Adam, Ulizaram Ad Olam. Right? They'll live 1,000 generations in uprightness. In other words, they'll continue to live the way God wants, right? And they will inherit all of man's inheritance. They'll inherit the world, and to their seed forever, to their children. Ubimei avis ba'u, in the days of famine they'll be satisfied. Ki risha'im yovedu, and again, it's going right into the next verse. Okay, so here we have. It's going on bimei avon yisbau, and in the days of hunger they will be satisfied. Ki risha'im yovedu, for the wicked will perish. And it's going right into the next verse again because it wants to point out again that their enemies will be destroyed. Its interpretation is that he will keep them alive in famine in the season of error. Again, remember that we're talking about the time of persecution, while many shall perish by famine and plague, all who did not go out to be with something, okay? And here, this is interesting. You can see that this is copied because he skipped a line by accident, and then he had to write it in between the lines. You see that? Here, 5a, and you can see it here also in the English. You can see that, right? And what's interesting is the person, the scribe who added this missing line, he did not write the Tetragrammaton in Paleo-Hebrew, apparently. Okay. But it's probably a different scribe who is looking it over and saying, oh, whoops, he skipped a line, right? Probably if we looked at it, we could figure it out. If we look at the scroll. Actually, I think if you look here, we can see. Yeah, there it is. You see the line there? You guys see where the little smushy line is in there? And it does, in fact, look up. Now, here we are, here. And it does, in fact, yes. And there you have the Tetragrammaton. You see written in regular block script, right? Now, I'm not a good enough paleographer to say, oh, this is a different script. It does, to me, it looks like a different script, actually. To me, it looks like a somewhat different script. Let's scroll in a little. Right? Here it is. Yovedu Hashem, right? Here, is that right? Let's take a look. Here, I'm not here. V'ohavei Hashem kikar kurim here. V'ohavei Hashem, you see that? Kikar kurim here. Can you see that? Isn't that cool? You can see it smushed in. You can see the Tetragrammaton here, written not in Paleo-Hebrew, right? And it looks like it's a different script because the regular script is quite beautiful. It's quite standard. This is kind of smushed in. It doesn't look so great. I think it's probably a different scribe. And I'm sure if we looked it up, we would find other people giving their opinions. And so here we have a situation where this is something that's been copied and someone is checking it and it's like, oh, whoops, you skipped a line, and they put it in. Okay, so we can see a little bit when we see things like this, we learn a little bit about the kind of traditions of copying at Qumran, and that these things that were written were also read and were also copied in multiple copies, and people took them very seriously. Okay, so here's the quote: "Va'avei Hashem kikar hurim." Let's go into. Did I actually read it correctly? Let's actually go into Va'avei, and this says it said Va'avei Hashem. This is Va'avei Hashem kikar karim, right? The enemies of God shall be consumed like grass. Kalu v'ashan kalu, consumed in smoke, right? And let's see the text, and the text that we have is those who love God. It's changed the verse. Have they changed the verse on purpose, or did they have a different version? And there's in something like this, it's very hard to know, right? And what is its interpretation? So its interpretation is going to be them, and they're not going to translate it as our. And again, the whole verse has essentially been changed, right, to mean that the lovers of God are going to be as precious as lambs. The whole meaning of the verse has changed, right? Completely changed the meaning of the verse. All right, and its interpretation, psharo, its interpretation, edat b'chiro asher you Rashim v'sarim, sown b'toch hadrehem. The community of his chosen will be heads and princes, sheep in their pastures, right? And some probably saying that leading sheep in their pastures, they will be like sheep in their pastures. Okay. Now there's still a kind of a chunk to go. Let's see what we want to do here. Do you guys want to stop and we'll continue next class, and then we'll do forky floral? Let's do that. So on that note, I'm just going to tell you what we looked at, because I know we're stopping in the middle. So we saw that I'm going to stop my share. Hold on. So we saw that Pesher Psalms is very much in the same theme as Pesher Nachum, showing a community that considers itself very embattled. People aren't following the correct law. They have some kind of conflict from inside against their leaders. They have conflict from outside by groups against their leaders as well. And they are foreseeing, on the one hand, destruction of these groups that oppose them. On the other, the possibility that some people will return and will do the correct law. And finally, of course, prosperity for themselves. And that's very important. We also saw some of the different scribal practices that we find at Qumran, writing tetragrammaton in paleographic Hebrew. We discussed like what that could mean. And also the fact that there are scribes kind of looking over and fixing things. And also the fact that verses that are interpreted can sometimes be completely different and completely changed. And the question always becomes, did they change this so they could write the interpretation? Or did they have a different version of the verse? And that's a question that we frequently ask when it comes to specifically the Pesher. So thank you very much for joining me. My apologies for going over. Are there any questions before we finish? Okay, thank you, everyone. Again, we're not meeting next week because of Purim, but I will see you in 2 weeks. We will continue with Pesher Psalms. We'll look at what used to be called 4Q Florilegium, which is a thematic, now it's called exegetical text, because that's a much more accurate title. But we'll look at that in our next class. So thank you for joining me, everyone.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thanks, Miriam.
Okay.
Happy Purim.
Take care. Happy Purim. Oh,
Thank
it's my birthday. It's my Hebrew birthday tonight. So yay
Yeah.
me.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mazal tov.
Yes, thank you. Adar Chet, yeah. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.